In Oklahoma City, you can't hear large vehicle-borne IED, truck bomb, without thinking of the Murrah Building. So my concern was there might be some argument that, well, this was only a 1,000-pound bomb, not a 5,000-pounder like McVeigh had, so you can't really, compare the two. So to blunt that argument, I worked with the Army up at Fort Riley, Kansas, and we reconstructed his 1,000-pound bomb and detonated that identical device on a range in Fort Riley. I was 1.5 miles away when I pushed the button. So at sentencing, we were able to show 6 images of that fireball and the devastation a bomb of that size could create.
Welcome to episode 386 of FBI Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to, once again, retired agent Barry Black, who served in the FBI for 31 years. In this episode, Barry reviews 2 bombing cases he worked as a Special Agent Bomb Tech, SABT, assigned to the Oklahoma City Division. The first case covers the detonation of a bomb at the University of Oklahoma football game in 2005, where subject Joel Henry Henrich III used a type of homemade explosive that had only been used by international terrorists. The second case is an undercover investigation named Operation Mischief Mayhem, a case Barry worked just before he retired, where he thwarted subject Jerry Drake Varnell's plan to build and deploy a 1,000-pound explosive device similar to the one Timothy McVeigh used to bomb the Alfred Murrah Federal Building. Barry was subpoenaed out of retirement to provide expert testimony at sentencing. These cases are included in Barry's new book, Hazardous Devices, Memoir of a FBI bomb technician, accountant, and sniper, where he writes about his 30-year career as a SWAT sniper, master bomb technician, and counterterrorism instructor. During this episode, Barry also shares more stories from his time on the task force that investigated the Oklahoma City bombing, where the lives of 168 people, including 19 children, were senselessly taken. Barry was a guest on FBI Case File Reviews, episode 308, Barry Black, Accountant to Master Bomb Tech. Barry served as an adjunct faculty member at the FBI Academy, a subject matter expert for the U.S. State Department, and an instructor for NATO's Center of Excellence. He has been a guest lecturer at police departments and military academies around the world, including Scotland Yard. Since retiring from the FBI, Barry is an adjunct faculty member at the University of Central Oklahoma's Forensic Science Institute. He has served as a consultant and provides commentary on national and international events for media outlets such as the BBC, the History Channel, Fox News, CNN, and a guest on the TV show True FBI. Now, before we get to the case review, I want to thank you for all your beautiful messages celebrating my 10th anniversary sharing FBI stories. These are difficult times for the FBI, and I appreciate your kind and encouraging words more than you'll ever know. I also want to let reader team members know to look for my February email in your inbox. If it's not there, check your spam filter and promotions tab. In this issue, I share news about what's happening in today's FBI, links to apply to the FBI's 2027 Honors Internship Program, and recommendations for an important new podcast called The Steady State Sentinel, and 3 new crime novels that I read last month. In your podcast app's description of this episode, you'll find a link to where you can join my reader team to keep up to date with the FBI in books, TV, and movies, and a link to where you can buy me a cup of coffee. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, back again, retired agent Barry Black. Hey, Barry.
Jerry, how are you?
I'm doing great. You were on the show the last time on episode 308, where we talked about your career as an FBI accountant and a little bit about your bomb tech stuff and Oklahoma City bombing.
Right. Yeah. The 31-year career kind of took some strange turns. So there were some ins and outs in that 3-decade period.
The main reason we did that, instead of doing a whole episode talking about your career as a special agent bomb tech, is because I knew you had this book that was coming out, and it is out now, and it's called Hazardous Devices.
I'm thrilled it's out. It's something I really never anticipated. I wrote it basically for my son and maybe his kids one day, but the fact that it got published and is actually out there is phenomenal for me and a little surprising.
Well, I'm glad again that I knew that the book would be coming out so that we could save the bomb tech cases while you were assigned to the Oklahoma City field office for this episode, because the book is packed with lots and lots of stories about your support of hundreds of bomb-related cases all over the world.
Yeah, I had a lot of great opportunities to serve our country and work with our partner nations, law enforcement, different parts of the world, military. It was an honor to do it, and it was a privilege.
Well, as we mentioned in the last episode, your FBI career afforded you the unique opportunity to travel around the world to blow up stuff.
And who wouldn't like a job like that, right? Even as a kid, that's an ideal profession.
Yeah, and one of the things that I liked about your book, and I've already talked to you about this, is that you talk to us about those assignments, but you also share a lot about all of these amazing and unique places that you've been to, where you always took the opportunity to dive with sharks and eat strange and exotic food. And so I really enjoyed that about the book. You gave us a peek into what it's like to be an FBI agent overseas who is interested in people and culture, and took full advantage of the fact that you got to travel on the FBI's dime.
Sure. The world's an amazing place. Some of the locations are particularly dangerous, but there's still amazing things to see, new experiences, and you have to kind of be bold, get out of your comfort zone a little bit, and go see what there is to offer.
Well, you're being modest because you got way out of your comfort zone. If somebody said, hey, you want to go here, and maybe you didn't even know the language, you just had to depend on the fact that this person was going to be looking out for you, and you would get in the car and go to the middle of the jungle and camp out and see leopards and tigers and elephants in their natural habitat. It was really fascinating to read.
Just a lot of great opportunities.
Yeah, definitely a bonus part of the book that I wasn't expecting and really enjoyed.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. Thank you.
All right. So you have supported cases all over the world. But what we're going to do today is concentrate on two that you worked on as a special agent bomb tech right in Oklahoma City. And that will allow us to review the case from predication all the way to sentencing. Before we do that, could you give us a quick tutorial about the FBI's bomb tech program, and also add in the types of explosives and maybe even the equipment that you use to render them safe or detonate them? I know I'm asking for a lot so that we're ready to understand and listen to the cases once we start reviewing them.
The FBI does a very broad base of different types of things. And when we look at explosives, if you go back to the 60s, the Vietnam era, the military was usually responsible for responding to improvised explosive devices, IEDs, domestically. But with the war in Southeast Asia, they were tied up, resources were short. So Congress directed the FBI to start what's known as the Hazardous Devices School in Huntsville, Alabama. It's on Redstone Arsenal, which is an Army installation. And it was operated as a joint venture between the Army and the FBI for years until eventually the FBI took over the whole program. It was sort of a stepchild at first. These things are expensive. It was a couple of Quonset huts in a field, and you had to use your imagination as far as the scenario-based training. Over time, as terrorism grew, there was a huge injection of federal money. We worked with the Brits and some others who had different types of experiences with large, like vehicle-borne IEDs from the Northern Ireland troubles and such, and modeled what is now a state-of-the-art hazardous devices school. It's the only school like it in the country. The FBI certifies all the non-military bomb technicians in the United States, and we train partner nation commandos, counterterrorism groups, and law enforcement, which is what brought about that international travel.
I was reading in your book about the different types of improvised explosives that you would be training on as a bomb tech. And I'm reading here that most of them are referred to as homemade explosives. And of course, the FBI has to have an acronym, so HMEs. What other types of explosives did you see and train people on during your career?
Sure. There are commercial explosives. Explosives are tools. So if you're in the mining industry or a quarry, there are explosives that are commercially available. And then obviously there are military explosives for military applications. Everybody's familiar with C4. TNT obviously is well known. Semtex is sort of a variant from another part of the world of C4. But then when we talk about homemade explosives or improvised explosives, ANFO, for instance, is just an acronym, ammonium nitrate and fuel oil. Well, that is a commercially available explosive, but for instance, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols made their own. So what was used in the Oklahoma City bombing was effectively HME, homemade explosive, just a homemade variant of the commercial version of ANFO. We trained with military explosives, commercial explosives, and then true homemade explosives as those became more prevalent, such as those that are based on peroxide recipes instead of nitrate recipes, which gets a little bit into the chemistry part.
Well, I know that there is a name that you use for one of those that really indicates you're not playing around when you deal with that type of explosives. You know what I'm talking about?
That would be the mother of Satan.
Wow. That's like a warning, stay away, danger.
Well, it was actually given that name by the terrorists that use it because so many of them killed themselves when they were trying to synthesize it. It's highly sensitive, highly dangerous, exceptionally powerful, depending on how you make it a tristone triperoxide or its chemical cousin, hexamethylene triperoxide diamine. It has the detonation velocity or equivalence of TNT somewhere between 50 to 88%. So it's extremely powerful, but it's also very, very sensitive, and thus the name Mother of Satan.
Wow. Okay. So I know I said we were going to talk about these two cases, and we are, because that's what I do here. But I do want to go back to the Oklahoma City bombing that we really had a chance during that last episode 308, to discuss. But in your book, I learned about two things that I didn't know about before. Now, the first one I want to talk about, the TOW missile.
Oh, right, the TOW missile.
And these two things that happened during the investigation of the Oklahoma City bombing, really had to lean on your expertise when they were discovered in the collection of the evidence. The first one was when rescue workers discovered this long rectangular wooden crate, and it had orange labels reading explosives. And they thought maybe it was some type of
secondary device.
Yeah, some type of a secondary device. And I think you referred to it in the book as a TOW missile. What was that? And why was it such a hiccup in the investigation? People were concerned.
Sure. Well, sadly, we train for these types of events, and experience teaches that where there's one bomb, there may be two or even three secondary or tertiary devices. And oftentimes, bomb technicians, first responders are targeted by those second devices. So that morning, I was on the second floor by the little playground where the kids were, and I noticed everybody fleeing the building. It was loud, it's chaotic. I didn't know, why everybody was running out, but later learned that some of the rescue workers had seen what you've just described, a large wooden crate with explosives markings. Well, again, the pure pandemonium after an event like that and the assumption that there could be other devices, the default, the standard operating procedure is you evacuate and assess the problem. There were still people in the building. I had to get out or off the building myself, went to the far side of a heavy bomb truck to find out what had happened. Got the description. Bomb techs went in, recovered this large wooden box. We transported it in what's called a single vent trailer out to an explosives range where I examined it. And it was what appeared to be a tow missile. It's an anti-tank weapon. Well, that's a curious thing to have in the federal building. But the way these things work, the FBI handles improvised explosive devices. Military ordnance falls under the purview of the military. So we work very closely with our military partners. And there was a explosive ordnance disposal group down at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I already knew them, the commanders, the operators. So I called. I said, look, I think we've recovered a tow missile out of the Murrah building. It's yours. It's military. Can you come examine it? They sent a team up and said, yep, that's a tow missile, but it's inert. However, it's been altered to appear live. Well, that's odd, obviously. And when that was found, it caused a delay in the recovery because if there's a second bomb in the building, obviously you have to have the first responders evacuate. So once it was removed, the evacuation resumed, but we had to kind of get to the bottom of this. So as it turned out, that particular tow missile was used or going to be used in an undercover sting operation by another federal agency. And we used the serial number on the launch tube to trace it back, oddly, to Redstone Arsenal, where our school is. And it had been reconfigured to appear real so that it could be used in a sting operation. So it was just another day in an office for another federal agency, but all the documentation had been destroyed in the bombing, and we kind of had to recreate how it had come to be there, again, to avoid some of the crazy conspiracy theories.
Well, another thing, in addition to a second explosive device that people are concerned about when there's an event like this, they're also concerned about a second bomber. And there was a time, I don't even know if the conspiracy theorists are satisfied that there wasn't a second bomber, but that was something else that I wasn't aware of, that a leg, an amputated leg, was found by rescue workers and evidence response team members, and nobody knew whose leg it was. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, these are horrible situations just on a personal level. A detonation of that size does just horrible things to the human body. And then there's the building collapse. Time does not help the deterioration of bodies. But as rescue workers were recovering remains, this leg was put in a body bag and sent to the medical examiner's office with all the other remains. Now, as you know, using the Incident Command System, or ICS, there's a thing called the Joint Information Center, or there'll be joint press releases where all the involved stakeholders know what's being said to the public and the media. In 1995, that just didn't exist. So the medical examiner, who's a fine man, medical doctor, put out a press release without the FBI's knowledge that said a leg clad in military style clothing and a military boot had been recovered and was unattributable to any known victim, and it was believed to be that of an Arabic male, Middle Eastern male. Well, of course, that generated a lot of response, shed the light maybe on international terrorism versus domestic terrorism, but we had to get to the bottom of it because we had no proof of that, but we did leave no stone unturned. So being an accountant, they said, you go figure it out. Well, I had no idea of medical training at all. The ME was absolutely overwhelmed, as most offices of that size would be. So I went in and talked to Dr. Jordan, again, great guy. And I said, listen, this is inopportune, but we have to get to the bottom of this. This press release you made, I understand it, but we have to know whose leg this is. So with no medical training of my own, I suggested that the doctors within the ME's office review each other's files. Well, this is a horrible event. They're overworked, overwhelmed, but they agreed, and I'm sure did what they could given the time allowed. And they said, we just don't see any problem. Well, that's not a great answer. So I said, all right, I'm going to need to go through some of the files. Can somebody explain what these indications and notations mean? And very quickly they said, look, if there's a straight line through a limb, that means the limb is gone. If there's a squiggly line, then that means it's kind of hanging on by tendon tissue or whatnot. And then there'll be property associated with each body that came in with the body bag. Okay, fine. So I went through those files and found some anomalies, things that just didn't make sense. One, there were, for instance, 2 shoes where the little diagram only showed one leg. Well, how do you have 2 shoes if there's only one leg? Just things that didn't make sense to me. But I quickly ran out of ideas. I was out of my depth, so I didn't know I could, but I called the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, the Smithsonian Institute, Dr. Clyde Snow, who's a forensic anthropologist, Emily Craig, another renowned forensic anthropologist, the FBI's Hairs and Fibers unit, special photography unit, our brand new DNA unit, and said, y'all fly out here. We got to get to the bottom of this. So we had a meeting at the ME's office. The leg, the clothing, everything was there on a stainless steel table. I remember it vividly. And all these experts put together a report in a very short order that said, this is not a male. It's a female, not Middle Eastern, African-American descent, about this height, about this age, about this weight, very physically fit. The clothing appears to be military. And the special photo unit was able to raise a single letter and 4 numbers that were handwritten in the throat of the boot. Well, so we had the Army Criminal Investigative Division assets assigned to our task force. So I asked the sergeant, what could that be? He said, probably the first letter of that soldier's last name and the last 4 of their social security number. So finally, we had some numbers I could work with. I went through the list of all the known victims and found a match for those 4 numbers, which statistically was a very good indication, but the letter didn't match. So the 4 numbers came back to an airman, a African-American female, the right height, age, weight. So I had the Air Force send over her personnel file, and she had enlisted under her maiden name. That was the correct initial. So now we had enough. DNA was in its nascent stages then, so we had enough at that point to go to her relatives. We got her birth certificate that had an inked footprint on it, and were able to match the footprint, and then later DNA to show that it was her leg. It wasn't a co-conspirator. She had been killed in the blast, and her body had sustained a great deal of damage. And the first responders simply put the leg that was near another body in that body bag, and it was an error. It was heartrending. The ME did a press release, cleared it up. He said, look, we're overworked, and this was a mistake. But eventually we returned the boot that came off that leg to the family. And on the anniversary of the bombing, the family still comes and has that boot and sets it on the memorial chair at the bombing memorial. It's a very touching thing, and I'm happy we were able to resolve that for the family.
I would think having that boot under those circumstances gave that family some physical sense of comfort.
At the 30th anniversary, which we've just had, the family came, the boot's in a plexiglass case wrapped in a flag. If you've ever been to the memorial or seen images, there are 168 chairs there to memorialize 168 victims. They're each etched with each victim's individual name. And Lakeisha's mom put that boot there for the day. It's very moving, but it just goes to show the importance of returning those personal effects to the families after these kinds of disasters.
Absolutely. I had chills as you were telling the story because not being able to answer that question could have caused issues with even the prosecution for years to come.
Oh, absolutely. And these cases, well, really every case, but particularly these major global investigations, it's chess, not checkers. What can somebody say went wrong or could have happened? And you need to answer those questions up front. But something of that magnitude, the defense was already saying, well, there's your bomber. It's not my guy. It's this person that you can't identify. So it was critical that leg be resolved. And again, for the family, too, it gave them some solace.
Thank you for sharing those, because if I had read the book when we did our initial discussion about the Oklahoma City bombings, those 2 things would have been big issues that we would have talked about. So I'm glad that I can add that to your FBI case file review podcast story and clear those up. But let me just tell people that things like this that happened during your career all over the world are throughout this book. And the 2 cases that we're going to talk about are probably, 10% of what you have written about. But, we had to pick something. And I think being able to talk about a case, from beginning to conclusion is always satisfying. So I think we're at a time now that we can start on those case reviews. So which one do you want to do first?
Well, it seemed just chronologically, the Joel Henry Heinrichs case occurred first, so maybe that's a place to start.
All right, let's do it.
Mentioned earlier peroxide-based explosives. So just a little bit of background. Most explosives are based on nitrate. I mentioned ammonium nitrate and fuel oil. The First World Trade Center attack involved ammonium nitrates. Our canine resources are trained to detect nitrate-based explosives. In the 80s, we began to see terrorists overseas changing the model some and using, it's not truly a new type of explosive, but it was uncommonly used that are based on peroxides. They were usually deemed too sensitive for anybody with any sense to try to use, but terrorists began to using TATP and its chemical cousin HMTD as detonators. A gram or two is powerful enough to set off a larger bomb. Well, then they progressed to using suicide belts, then suicide vests, then entire charges made of peroxide explosives. So with the Bureau's responsibility to train our state and local partners and stay ahead of that terrorist threat ourselves, we began training on peroxide-based explosives, anticipating that it would move to the West. You know Dr. Kirk Yeager, he's a great guy, expert, one of the lead scientists for the FBI lab.
Yeah, I interviewed him on episode 331, and he also had a book called The Bomb Doctor, so people can check that out too. But you worked closely with him.
Kirk's a great guy. I'm happy to call him a friend and colleague. Highly adept at his skill. Chemistry is his primary thing. But as we saw this global trend towards terrorists using this, what we'll call a new type of explosive, Dr. Yeager and the Bureau had just finished some training for the special agent bomb techs with the FBI about this new thing, these peroxide-based explosives. So you go back in 99, Ahmad Rassam was stopped at Port of Los Angeles. He was going to be the New Year's Eve bomber in LA. And then the next year, or in 2001, Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, the detonator in his shoe was made of TATP. And then fast forward to 2025, there were a series of bombings over the summer in July in London where peroxide-based explosives were used. So clearly, Mother Satan was moving to the West. We knew after 9/11 that transportation, airlines, trains had been hardened. It was going to be more difficult to introduce IEDs onto those modes of transit. And our intelligence, our global intelligence, said that terrorists would start targeting other events like malls, which we've seen, concerts, which we've seen, and sporting events. So on the night of August 1 in 2005, I got a call from bomb technicians working the University of Oklahoma, Kansas football game that a bomb had gone off right outside the stadium. Well, that's disconcerting and not good, but what was unique, because of the training the FBI provides, the bomb technicians inside the stadium said that this was going to be different because it was a high explosive. Most bombs in the U.S., IEDs, are low explosives like gunpowder, smokeless powder, or black powder. And the sound they make is basically a function of their detonation velocity. So a higher explosive makes a sharp kind of a cracking sound instead of a low rumble, if you'll think of it that way. So they could tell from the brisance, that crack, that this was a high explosive event, which is not particularly common. I showed up on campus. They had already disrupted a backpack that was at the foot of what was left of a body, about 180 yards away from the stadium in what they call the North Oval. It's kind of the park area outside the stadium. At halftime back then, you could get a pass to leave the stadium, and people would often go to that area to have a drink or buy a T-shirt or hot dog, whatnot. And this event happened 7 minutes before halftime. So the timing was odd, the type of detonation was odd. And when I showed up, we'd been well-trained on post-blast investigations. The standard telltale signs just weren't there. This was different. The body was in horrible condition. Teeth were crushed, limbs were gone, head gone, but there were not the general remnants of a standard IED. So something was unique. And we started a command post. Things, just like in every other bombing investigation, happened rapidly. We recovered an ID from the body. One was a state driver's license, the other a university ID. So we worked with the Highway Patrol and the university police to see if either was real, and they both were. It turns out he was an engineering student on campus, had an address at a fraternity on campus, so we sent agents there. I began interviewing people, but then we found an apartment off campus. Well, by now it's about 3:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning. ERT, our evidence response team, was already at the apartment, which I didn't know about yet. So the head of the ERT called and said, okay, we're about to make entry and start the search. I said, where are you? He goes, well, we're at the apartment. I said, no, don't go in there yet. We don't know if there's more explosives, booby traps, other bad guys. I didn't even know about this address. So George Malden and Dave Frutiger, two of the local bomb techs, or FBI trained and really great bomb techs, accompanied me. We went to the apartment, gained entry. There was obviously an exigent circumstance. We had located and identified the roommate, who happened to be Pakistani. He said, sure, you can search, do whatever you need to do. So we had consent and plus that exigent circumstance. So we went in, standard old college apartment, 2 bedrooms, a small living room and kitchen. But what I remember was this strong chemical odor. It smelled like a dentist's office. And we did kind of a quick peek around, and I saw in the trash can a bottle of hydrogen peroxide. Well, from the training we had just had and thinking back to the uncommon details at the scene itself, I began to think, well, could this be this new peroxide explosive? It had never been used as a main charge in the United States before. So what are the odds it's going to be used here in Norman, Oklahoma? But when we did a quick peek around the room, there was a Tupperware container with about a half pound of this white crystalline material, which is what this material looks like. You need a reaction vessel to synthesize it. There was a crock pot with some of the same material in it. So I believed we were dealing with either TATP or HMTD. Now, at the time, in 2005, there were no scientific tools in the field to assess this material. The odds of finding it were just so remote, and the testing equipment was pretty expensive. So the national protocol was to call the FBI explosives unit, and then they would send, in this case, Dr. Yeager and another chemist out with a type of spectrometer that had really never left the lab before. So that morning, before sunup on Sunday, I told the SAC, I said, look, I think we're dealing with something that we haven't seen before. It's highly sensitive. There are no tools in the field to safely test it. We need to bring in headquarters assets. And he just looked at me and said, well, you make your recommendation, which, as you know, in Bureau parlance, if you're wrong, you're going to get moved to Montana or someplace. But I said, look, this is what we need to do. We need to wake up the aviation unit. I've already called Kurt Yeager. We've known each other a while. He's ready to come out, but that's what needs to happen. So Kirk and another chemist flew out on a Bureau jet, ERT set up. He brought out the mass spectrometer. It basically projects a laser and then is able to read the return against a library. It produces a histogram and it reads that against the library. And he said, this is like 99% pure TATP.
Wow. And that's what you told us is used by terrorists overseas in the Middle East.
Yes. And had never been used as a main charge here before. So this was truly unique.
Yeah, I'm so curious about who this guy is and what he was up to.
Well, so are we. He was a bit of a loner. The FBI machine, along with our state and local partners, manage data really better than anybody else. The interview skills, the IT skill. My position as the bomb tech was, this is exigent. This is an emergency. These explosives do not age well. The older they get, the more sensitive they get. So my opinion, when I was talking with the U.S. Attorney's Office, was we need to go ahead and resolve this now. Well, as is often the case, they thought, well, we're better off with a search warrant. So we need to wait for the judge. We didn't get sideways, but we had a difference of opinion on how long we needed to wait. With the concurrence of the roommate, we went ahead and conducted a search of all the common areas in that roommate's bedroom. And we found the precursors in a closet. The recipes are out there, but you need, acetone and a strong acid and certain things. Well, we found those containers, which fit completely into the narrative. And then we finally got the warrant and were able to go into the decedent's bedroom. And it was a little bomb factory. We had seen where he had used matches it's called a flame test, his TATP. It works better if you crush it. So he had crushed it with a beer bottle. We found other IEDs and bulk explosives. But as that part was ongoing, the rest of the task force conducted 200 interviews. We found where he had purchased the precursors at a Walmart, I believe, and an Ace Hardware just days before. He had stopped at a fertilizer store and a farm store to try to buy a specific type of ammonium nitrate. Well, we talked about ammonium nitrate as a precursor for ANFO. The type they sold was not ideal for making ANFO, so he didn't buy it. But there's a lot of things that have to happen at once. So while we were working the issue in the apartment, the whole team was conducting these types of searches. We seized a computer with over 150 gigs of information, 600 CDs were reviewed. He had accessed campus computers 214 times. All of that information has to be examined, and it was effectively done by Monday morning.
All hands on deck.
Absolutely. If this were terrorism, we need to know. And I was getting calls from the NFL, other colleges. Hey, is this terrorism, or are our games going to be attacked? As it turns out, he was a despondent college kid, had a little trouble getting dates. At the beginning of this game was the National Merit Scholarship Award. Well, he had just lost his National Merit Scholarship. And the last thing on his computer screen was what I think anybody would classify as a suicide note. So we sent that, of course, to the BAU, the Behavioral Analysis Unit. And they said, yeah, definitely, he was not planning on coming back, but we can't tell if he was planning on killing others or not. We can't tell from the verbiage. So it was not terrorism. It was a distraught lone actor, at a minimum, killed himself. Yeah.
And had a bomb-making factory in his college dorm apartment.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. These are crazy cases, but you don't know. When you first show up, you have to use your training and experience and all the information available at the time, and just follow the evidence to its logical conclusion. It's easy to make the assumptions. A lot of times you'll hear the media, this is terrorism. I worked a case one time where another federal agency in another state had given a press release about the case we were on, saying it's terrorism. Well, the White House ended up calling me and said, is this terrorism or not? I'm like, we don't know yet. It's just too early. So a lot of times you have to kind of tamp down the desire to make some kind of wild assumption until you actually know what you're talking about.
And of course, this one had all the markings of terrorism, but it was just his chosen method of suicide.
Right. Now, there are some that think he may have intended to take others with him. This was a large device. Dr. Yeager estimated the net explosive weight. If he had moved 187 yards towards the stadium at halftime, there would have been a lot of people in a very tight group underneath a hard parking garage deck. It could have been exceptionally deadly.
Yeah, I can see that now. Because if he just wanted to commit suicide, he certainly did not need to concoct a explosive device and then carry it with him to a stadium where thousands of people were gathered. So yeah, it sounds like his intention was to take more than himself out.
We'll never know.
Yeah.
If along your line of thought, behind his apartment was a quiet little duck pond where you don't have to carry, a kilo or two of this exceptionally sensitive explosive very far. We'll never know. But it was a very fast-moving case that came to fruition just really within a matter of days.
A fast-moving, fascinating case. Let me ask you a question. The roommate was from Pakistan. I would think that there may have been some concerns that he was involved in this.
You were in the FBI a long time. You don't know what you don't know, and you have to go in eyes wide open. So the fact that he was from that part of the world obviously did not go unnoticed. And oddly enough, just some of the crazy things that happened in these cases, while I was en route from the fraternity house where we started the interviews to meet ERT at the apartment, and it told them to stand by until we did a quick sweep there. The surveillance teams noticed another group of people running down the steps wearing rubber gloves, discarding trash into the dumpster, and then driving away quite erratically. Well, that got some attention as well. So there was a car stop done on them. Turns out it was just some other college kids moving out of their apartment. One of them had a skin condition, so when they were cleaning the sink, he was wearing the rubber gloves. Had nothing to do with any of it, but you don't know, so you check it all out.
What an interesting career you've had to be involved in those type of investigations.
I was very fortunate. And just the 31 years I was in the Bureau, there were so many changes domestically and internationally with the types of crimes the Bureau worked. So I was presented with a lot of opportunities.
From your book, again, fascinating stories, there was another case that happened in Oklahoma City. The thing that was so unique about this case was it was at the very, very end of your career. It was like a signature case for you to take with you as you walked out the door. Tell us about that.
Again, just a crazy circumstance. I was fortunate in my career to stay in Oklahoma for all 30 years. Often agents are moved from place to place. So I arrested people twice, even three times, and so you get to know these people. But in 2010, I got a call from, again, the Norman, Oklahoma Police Department. They said that they had just gotten a telephonic bomb threat threatening to blow up their police station. Well, obviously, that's a federal crime. I was talking to the officer, and he said, well, we know who it is. And I said, well, if you know who it is, why don't you arrest? I mean, it's also a state crime. He said, well, we traced the call back to Tulsa, which is about 100 miles away. We thought maybe since it is a federal crime, you guys could help get things moving a little bit quicker. Of course, absolutely. His background, the caller's background, propensity for violence, had violated a victim protection order, had threatened to kill, I believe he had threatened to kill a judge. His attorney had mentioned a McVeigh-style attack, killing women and children. So this was a serious thing. So taking full advantage of the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force model, I called the JTTF in Tulsa, which had Tulsa police officers assigned to the task force. I said, look, this guy, his name's Brent Ellison's. He's got an outstanding local warrant for the violation of the VPO, but apparently he's also just threatened to bomb the police station. He's supposed to be at this relative's house. Can you guys go pick him up on the local warrant? So they sent a couple of units out. Ellison saw him coming, takes off running. There's a foot chase. Of course, you're not going to outrun the police. He was arrested on the local warrant. And then I superseded with the federal complaint of threat to bomb the police station. He was convicted, sentenced to prison for 30 months, and then was supposed to serve a term of probation. But he violated the terms of his probation, which makes him a fugitive again. So as you know, the U.S. Marshal Service looks for those types of fugitives. So marshals were looking for him, found him, arrested him. He goes back to jail. But while he's sitting in prison, conscience, I guess, got the better of him, because while he was on the lam, he met a man named Jerry Drake Varnell. And Varnell had told him how he wanted to have a McVeigh-style attack, basically blow up the Federal Reserve Building in Washington, D.C. He was enamored with the movie Fight Club. I don't know if you've seen the movie, but basically they were going to blow up a bunch of buildings and set everyone's debt clock to zero, attack against capitalism, this type of thing.
I've watched it a number of times and read the book.
Well, so we're not supposed to talk about Fight Club, but so that was sort of the odd model. Sadly, there are so many threats. The first thing we look at, is it even viable? Is this a viable threat? Can what they're saying they're going to do even be done? So Brent Ellison's told his attorney, the attorney called Department of Justice called us out here in Oklahoma. And once he was released from prison, JTTF agents went to interview him. And he told the whole story, how he had met Varnell over the internet while he was a fugitive himself, and that he wanted to blow up the Federal Reserve, that he had a background in explosives and electronics, lived out in rural Oklahoma where there was plenty of fuel, plenty of fertilizer, had invoked McVeigh's name. Those agents would come back and we would talk and they would say, is this viable? Can he do what he's saying? I was like, well, we don't know yet. So Ellison's agreed to continue to meet with Varnell just to try to get some more information. And it got to a point where it was quite evident to me this guy was capable of building a large IED. He wanted a 1,000-pound vehicle-borne IED, specifically made of ANFO, which is what McVeigh had used. He said he had background in electronics and wanted the detonation system to include a cell phone. Well, these are all viable things. So at some point, we have to consider, obviously, public safety. And I said, listen, he could decide to do this on his own. We need to intervene. And we started an undercover operation, which was maybe cleverly named Operation Mischief Mayhem from the movie Fight Club. So it came to a point where we needed to get Ellison's out and introduce an undercover agent just for Ellison's own safety. We introduced a friend of mine as the undercover agent, but he doesn't know much about explosives. Why would you?
Explain that term just for others who aren't sure what you mean by introduce. So you had Ellison's, he's just a guy. He's a citizen, not a law enforcement officer. And we now think this is a dangerous situation. So, and plus he's a convicted felon. So we have to think about testimony down the road. So at some point, a decision has to be made if we're going to open a true undercover investigation and put an undercover FBI agent into the situation, which allows us to move Ellison's out of the way for safety.
So we introduced this undercover agent. Actually, I told Ellison's, listen, tell Varnell that this is your buddy and his background is in explosives. He's an apprentice blaster for a quarry out in West Virginia, and he's out here to see his girlfriend. And, he doesn't like the government either. Whatever your issue is with the government, he shares the same vantage. So we'll put the two of you guys together. My concern technically was, is he going to make HME and go do this on his own, which is a problem, obviously. So I suggested our undercover agent tell Varnell, look, the guy I work for, the blaster, he doesn't like the government either. He shares your concerns. And he's actually been stealing commercial explosives from job sites because it's really not that well accounted for. And he's willing to give it to you if you'll pull the trigger, because he doesn't really have the gumption to do it, but he'll help you by giving you these commercial explosives. Well, obviously, commercial explosives are a lot better to use if you're a bomber because they're designed to blow up. Your homemade recipe may fail. So Varnell accepted that offer of help, started to do surveillance, what we call overt acts that show intent. It was decided that the Federal Reserve Building, which is in Washington, is a little far away to drive a 1,000-pound bomb. So he sort of changed targets to look at the IRS headquarters in Dallas. Well, again, that's still at best a 3-hour drive carrying a 1,000-pound bomb. So the surveillance shifted to Bank First in Oklahoma City, which sadly enough is about 4 blocks from the Murrah Building. It's in the shadow of the National Bombing Memorial. It was I believe the 4th largest bank in the state at the time and the 174th largest bank in the country. So it's a headquarters of a major financial institution.
From the beginning, you weren't going to let this happen, but who decided that would be the target?
Well, it morphed over time. So again, if we could control where it happened, we would have a greater degree of safety. My concern, we're involved now, right? So if he builds this device, whether it's live or not, and we weren't going to let him build a live one, and gets pulled over for his tag light being out or an unsafe lane change by some trooper in, Memphis, they might kill him because a 1,000-pound bomb is hard to hide. So closer was better just for logistics' sake. He ultimately decided on this bank in downtown Oklahoma City. So once the target was selected, we had to control the situation for safety. Keep in mind, there was a terrorist that wanted to blow up the Fountain Towers, a big skyscraper in Dallas previously. A lot of times these terrorists, they just want a bomb. Get me a bomb, I'll deliver it, I'll pull the trigger and do my thing. Varnell, he wanted to build the bomb. He wanted to be intimately involved in creating this weapon of mass destruction. Well, that became a problem because his background, according to his own admission, was some knowledge of electronics, some knowledge of explosives. So this was going to be unique. So we devised a way to provide him with chemically inert materials that looked and smelled and felt like live explosives. They were delivered to him in their commercial packaging because that's what he was expecting. And then to perpetuate this whole backstory of undercover, our undercover agent drove a big King Ranch pickup that had West Virginia plates. And I had one of our offices in West Virginia send me a seafood bag that I wrapped the inert detonators in. So it had a West Virginia address. It's just the little details. But that night, our undercover delivered this truck full of explosives. 1,000 pounds of ostensibly was commercial info, dynamite, pentolite cast boosters, the other things you need to make a bomb like this. 2 detonators wrapped up in a catfish sack from West Virginia, and this cell phone time and power unit with instructions on how to function the time and power unit. It had the cell phone that he wanted and all the electronics that you need to make it work. I had written those instructions. The undercover agent said, okay, here's what you've asked for. But now the question became, where are you going to build a 1,000-pound bomb? He was not a suicide bomber. He didn't want to die. So I told the undercover agent, all right, tell him this. You're from West Virginia. The only reason you're out here is your girlfriend's grandma passed away. And she's got a little storage shed way out in the country in a little town called El Reno. You can get a key to the storage shed and he can build the bomb there in privacy and it won't be attributable to anybody. Well, he liked that idea. So we rented, it was, I believe, shed number 183 at a place called Tiny Giant in El Reno, filled it with garage sale furniture and old clothes and whatnot, but had it completely teched up with audio, video, CCTV.
You were really thinking about all those little details to make it seem legit.
The devil's in the details, as they say. These types of operations are intensive and little things can make a big difference. So it was very well considered. It was a group effort and it was very well considered. But yeah, that night, Varnell was there. The truck truck delivered the materials. And I'm sitting at the emergency operations center with the chief of police, the special agent in charge, the U.S. attorney, and we watch him start constructing this bomb, tearing open the bags of ANFO. It has a distinct diesel odor. And that's what he said. He goes, "Oh, I love the smell of diesel." And then he pulled out a stick of dynamite and he goes, "Well, this is the good stuff." So all these were incredibly telling about his intent and his knowledge. And I still hoped that he was not going to go through this. You remember, this is 4 blocks away from the Murrah Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, right? But eventually he constructed the device and there was really not much more to do but deliver it. So I had set up a little command post at a hotel across the street from the bank that gave me visual over any avenue of ingress and egress. You're familiar with our aircraft called Night Stalker. It has FLIR. It's a surveillance plane. So we had aerial coverage, discrete, covert aerial coverage, and then rolling surveillance and static surveillance, because we couldn't let this, what looks like a bomb, out of our control. The aircraft was calling out, every half mile or so, and I was monitoring it. And I thought, I guess he's really going to do this. And I watched from the window of the hotel. He turned the corner and he had selected an alley behind the bank where there was a little parking garage underneath. But just as he's making the turn, a security guard parks a little, I think it was a Ford Taurus, some kind of little car, and blocks the alley. Just pure chance. Well, Thornell keeps driving south. The highway, I-35, is very close by, which will take him straight to the IRS building in Dallas. So we wondered for a second if he was just going to change targets. Well, we had already made preparation for that with our office in Dallas and Texas DPS. But the airplane called out every turn. He kept making right turns and then came back. Security officer had left. Alley was free. He pulled the van in, and we had thermal imagery where he walks out, meets the undercover agent in the getaway vehicle, and drives off. He had selected a location. There's a bus station near the highway because he wanted to feel and see the blast. So he's driving south with our undercover agent. But the U.S. attorney, who's sitting in our emergency operations center, they said, "Look, we've read your instructions. They're pretty thorough. I mean, you got to do all these things to make this go off," which was intentional because we anticipate people are going to say there was entrapment issues. Well, had he not followed this very specific list of instructions on how to make it blow up, then he could say, "I changed my mind," or whatever. So anyway, the prosecutor said, "Go see if he actually followed the instructions." So I said, "Well, where is he?" Number one, they said, "Yeah, we've got eyes on him. SWAT team's following him. So it's safe to go check." So I left the hotel across the street, went down the alley, and it was an eerie sight. This white van with blacked out windows was parked underneath the little parking garage, really beneath the bank. The lights were still on, but the doors were locked. Well, I had learned from Tim McVeigh, he discarded the key to that Ryder truck as he fled. So obviously you don't want to get caught with your key that delivered the bomb. So I had made a duplicate key for that vehicle the day before. So I pulled the duplicate key out, unlocked the passenger door, and there in the front seat was the whole, what we call time and power unit with the cell phone. It was all properly wired. All the electronics were in the right position. All he had to do was dial the code into this West Virginia cell phone number and the bomb would detonate. So I radioed back, said, "Everything's proper, it's ready to fire." And they said, "Okay, well, let's see what happens." So I was heading back to the hotel, cross the street, hit the button for the elevator, and this group of inebriated wedding people got on and literally pushed every button in the elevator. Well, I lost cell signal. So by the time I got up to the proper floor, I got out, he had dialed the code 3 times because the code he was to dial didn't actually dial the bomb, it dialed my cell phone. So I stuck my head in the little...
We had to stop for a second because that is so ingenious. When I read that, I was like, what?
Yeah, no, it was something. It was amazing. Of course, the fact that he dialed it 3 times certainly went to show intent. So I stuck my head in the hotel room where we had a SWAT radio operator. I told him to execute, and he sent the word to the SWAT team who was waiting at the bus station. And of course, we had the getaway vehicle teched up as well. So we have the video where he dialed it the first time, nothing happened. He's looking, dials it the second time, nothing happened, has a cigarette. Third time he dials it, well, that's when the SWAT team was pulling him out of the window. So it was a very effective night.
That is great. So many of these case reviews that I do, I can see how they could be part of a movie or a TV show. But these are things that happen in real life.
It's real life. And I stayed in the FBI a lot longer than I intended. Most careers are 20, maybe 25 years. I loved every minute of it. I felt like I was doing some good, helping some people. And plus, it was fascinating.
Well, that brings up the point that you retired before this case was over.
Right. I retired in December of 2019. There was some delay. So he was arrested on a complaint basically immediately. He was later indicted, but then there was this argument that he was criminally insane. So he was examined, found to be competent to stand trial. There was a superseding indictment, which added the attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction. So by the time this actually came, I was still in the Bureau during the trial, but I had retired before the sentencing. Oddly enough, everybody's entitled to a strong defense, and that's a wonderful thing. One of the prosecutors of Oak Bomb was now his defense attorney, and I knew her well. She's bright, very talented attorney. And from a bomb perspective, in Oklahoma City, you can't hear large vehicle-borne IED, truck bomb, without thinking of the Murrah Building. So my concern was there might be some argument that, well, this was only a 1,000-pound bomb, not a 5,000-pounder like McVeigh had, so you can't really, compare the two. So to blunt that argument, I worked with the Army up at Fort Riley, Kansas, and we reconstructed his 1,000-pound bomb and brought out the special photo unit and some scientific testing equipment and detonated that identical device on a range in Fort Riley. I was a mile and a half away when I pushed the button. And the judge said that the high-speed, slow-motion video of that detonation would be too prejudicial to show the jury. It was too devastating. But he said, we'll let you take some still clips from that video and you can show them the clips and explain what's happening. So at sentencing, we were able to show 6 images of that fireball and the devastation a bomb of that size could create. But yeah, I was actually subpoenaed back after retirement to testify as an expert in his sentencing.
Well, let's talk about your retirement party real quick, because that was kind of full circle too, because from the windows of where your retirement party took place, tell us what you could see.
Well, Oklahoma, of course, is an oil state. That's, what it's known for, oil and cowboys. And there's a very nice place called the Petroleum Club. It's one of the taller buildings right downtown. Clustered around it is the National Bombing Memorial and Bank First. So my family, my friends, the Bureau family came out. It was a really humbling and wonderful evening. But to walk out, retired, look across the street, there's Bank First, 4 blocks to the north, the Murrah Building. And to have this case, a guy invoking McVeigh's name to deliver a large vehicle bomb, just like McVeigh had done before, it was kind of a surreal evening and the end of a career that I'm quite proud of and thankful to have had the opportunity to do.
Well, again, we've only touched a few of the cases that you wrote about in your book, Hazardous Devices, which is out now. So I hope that people who have enjoyed this case review will go out and pick it up. It's available, as they say, wherever books are sold.
Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Now, I know we did do my standard question the last time, and I am thinking, well, maybe I should just make those people, ensure those people go and listen to episode 3082 in order to find out your origin story, but maybe that's not fair. So why don't we do a quick version of when and why you joined the FBI?
I joined the FBI in 1988. I was 24 years old, and truly it had been a childhood dream. A lot of people, when you're young, you want to be an astronaut or Nobel laureate or whatever it might be. I wanted to be an FBI agent since I was 10 years old. Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. and the FBI story and the movies, just the mystique. And then I had a little league coach that he volunteered his time as a little league coach. He was an FBI agent, great guy, great role model. I told him, hey, that's what I want to do. And he didn't blow me off. He was very encouraging, although, as you know, the odds of actually getting to be an FBI agent are really quite slim. I stayed in touch with him through high school and college, and then he handed me off to a recruiter. And I actually changed majors. I was an engineering major, and the recruiter said, well, we're really not hiring engineers, we're hiring accountants. So I've changed majors, actually changed schools to get the accounting degree, and came in under what was called the accounting specialty program back then. The Bureau doesn't even have it anymore, but there was such a special need, a critical need for accountants. If you had an accounting degree and could pass the FBI accounting exam, they would waive another requirement that you have 3 years of work experience. So that's the way I got in so young at the age of 24.
And as you had already mentioned to us, you spent your entire career based in Oklahoma City. We can't say that you worked there.
It worked out so well for me. Again, the Bureau's model changed. By the time Director Free became director, he said, if you've been somewhere for a decade and like it, we'll leave you there. So I opted to stay. And truly, when I got in the Bureau as an accountant, I knew I would work white collar because that's why they hired me. And there was bank fraud and bankruptcy fraud and stock manipulation, mostly due to the oil business failing in the 80s. And it was, fascinating work for an accountant. But as my career shifted, the nation's needs shifted. That's when I became a sniper, and then had the opportunity to become a bomb technician, and then ended up being, a counterterrorism instructor around the world. It was a strange, long, winding journey that I was very, very happy to have the opportunity to do.
Especially for somebody who began his adult career thinking that he wanted to be an engineer.
Right. Yeah, it was a far cry from engineering. And accounting was not on top of my list either, but it was sure a means to an end.
All right. So we are at the point where I like to ask my guest for their last word, your words of wisdom. So what would you like to say?
Well, I think looking back, I've been retired about 6 years now. I teach at a local university, and it's nice to see those young kind of fresh faces that are going to be the next wave of scientists and law enforcement officers and agents. Yeah, you just have to dream big. If you sit by and do nothing, then nothing's going to happen. As you mentioned earlier, I was sent to a lot of far-flung places, and it would have been easy to just do the work and then come home. But there are a lot of things to see, a lot of things to try and do. And I think it's good to seize those opportunities and make the most of every chance.
And that's the end of the interview. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a link to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com, where you'll find case-related photos of Barry Black, links to articles about the cases reviewed, and, of course, a link where you can purchase his book, Hazardous Devices, Memoir of an FBI Bomb Technician, Accountant, and Sniper. There are also links to other FBI case file review episodes about the Oklahoma City bombing and what it's like to be an FBI special agent bomb tech. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 100 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist, where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.